Good evening, fellow wanderers of the quiet hours. As the day's noise fades away and the world settles into stillness, let's journey together to a time when life moved at a gentler pace. Tonight, we're traveling back to medieval England in the 13th century to discover the peaceful rhythms of daily life in a village monastery. Asterisk. Let the weight of today's worries drift away like morning mist. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like, and let my voice guide you through the soft corridors of history. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember for tomorrow. Just let yourself sink into the gentle embrace of the past, where monks tended gardens, copied manuscripts by candlelight, and lived according to the ancient rhythm of prayer bells marking the hours. Asterisk. Imagine waking up in 13th century England within the peaceful walls of a Benedictine monastery. The first light of dawn filters through narrow stone windows, casting gentle shadows across your simple cell with its rough wooden bed and small writing desk. There are no alarm clocks here, no rushing to check phones or emails. The monks wake, naturally with the sun, their bodies attuned to the ancient rhythms that have guided monastic life for centuries. Asterisk. The air is crisp and clean, carrying the scents of herb gardens, beeswax candles, and the faint aroma of bread baking in the monastery kitchen. In the distance you might hear the gentle chanting from the chapel, the soft shuffle of sandaled feet on stone floors, the quiet scratching of quill pens on parchment, and the peaceful rustling of leaves in the cloister garden. Asterisk. The monks of this 13th century monastery lived according to seasons and the divine hours marked by bells. There was no artificial lighting to extend the day, no technology to blur the boundaries between work and prayer. When darkness fell, the brothers gathered in the candlelit chapel for Compline, the final service of the day, before retiring to peaceful silence until dawn. Asterisk. Life moved slowly, deliberately, following the rule of Saint Benedict. Each task had its proper time and place. There were hours for prayer, hours for study, hours for manual labor in the gardens and workshops. There was a profound peace in this rhythm, a connection to God and the natural world that modern life has largely forgotten. The monks knew each other deeply, understood the cycles of the liturgical calendar, lived within the gentle boundaries of their cloistered community. Asterisk. Work in 13th century monastery. Life was different from our modern understanding. It wasn't separated. From spiritual life, it was woven into the fabric of daily devotion, like threads in a tapestry. Monks didn't commute to offices or factories. Their workplace was the monastery itself, the scriptorium, the gardens, the kitchen, the workshops within the peaceful cloister walls. Asterisk. A typical Benedictine monk would rise with the sun after lauds and begin their assigned tasks slowly, methodically. There was no rushing, no pressure to maximize efficiency every moment. Work was steady, rhythmic, almost meditative, a form of prayer through action. The sound of gentle monastery labor, the soft scratching of quill pens on parchment, the quiet rustle of turning manuscript pages, the gentle splash of water in the herb garden, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables in the kitchen, created a peaceful symphony of contemplative productivity. Asterisk. Monks took pride in their craft, in doing things properly rather than quickly. A brother working in the scriptorium would prepare his parchment with patient, experienced hands, mixing his inks with careful attention to color and consistency, copying sacred texts with reverent precision. Each page was a prayer, each carefully formed letter, an act of devotion. Asterisk. There were natural breaks in the work, day times for the canonical hours when bells would ring and all work would stop for communal prayer. Prime at 6 in the morning, Paris at 9, Sext at noon, none at 3. In the afternoon, these weren't just timekeepers. They were gentle reminders to pause, to pray, to connect with the divine rhythm that governed all monastery life. Asterisk. In the 13th century Benedictine monastery, community wasn't an abstract concept. It was a living, breathing reality that shaped every aspect of daily life. The monastery was small enough that each monk knew every other brother intimately. They shared not just physical space within the cloister walls, but the rhythms of prayer, work, and contemplation itself. Asterisk. When someone needed help with manuscript copying, brothers appeared without being asked. When a monk fell ill, the community gathered around him like a protective embrace. This wasn't charity. It was simply how monastic life worked, how the brothers survived and thrived together in their shared devotion to God. Asterisk. The daily gathering in the refectory for meals was more than nourishment. It was community prayer, silent fellowship, spiritual communion. Monks would dress in their finest brown robes, not to impress but to honor their brothers and the sacred nature of shared sustenance. No conversations flowed during meals, but a profound communication moved through the room like gentle streams, the communion of souls united in common purpose. Asterisk. Novices grew up within the monastery walls, surrounded by elder monks who all felt responsible for their spiritual well-being. They learned by watching the measured movements of their elders, by helping with simple tasks, by being part of the gentle flow of monastic life. There was no rush to advance, no pressure to achieve worldly success. Spiritual growth was allowed to unfold naturally, like flowers opening to morning light. Asterisk evenings brought the community together for Compline, the final prayer service of the day. Monks would gather in the candlelit chapel to chant the ancient songs that had echoed through monastery walls for centuries. The boundaries between individual and community were soft, permeable. Each monk found his identity not in standing apart, but in belonging to something eternal and sacred. Asterisk. Religion in 13th century monastery life wasn't confined to chapel services or special holy days. It was woven into the fabric of daily existence, like golden thread through rough brown cloth. The sacred and the ordinary existed side by side, each giving meaning to the other in an endless dance of devotion. Asterisk. Monks began each day with vigils before dawn, not as obligation, but as connection to God, to their community, to the larger rhythms of divine existence. They marked the hours with the canonical offices, brief moments of communal prayer that brought peace and purpose to every ordinary task, from copying manuscripts to tending turnips in the garden. Asterisk. The chapel itself was the beating heart of the community, not just for formal worship, but for private prayer, for meditation, for marking the important moments of monastic life. Its bells created a gentle soundtrack to daily existence, reminding the brothers of prayer times, announcing feast days, calling the community together for communal discernment. Asterisk. Religious feast days weren't separate from monastic life. They were the punctuation marks that gave meaning and rhythm to the passing seasons. These celebrations brought subtle changes to the monastery routine, special foods in the refectory, additional candles in the chapel, perhaps a break from regular work for extra prayer and reflection. Asterisk, even the simplest daily activities were touched with this sense of the sacred. Breaking bread in the refectory was a moment of gratitude for God's providence. Lighting a candle in the evening was both practical necessity and spiritual practice. Working in the herb garden connected the monks to the divine creativity that brought forth healing plants from simple soil and seed. Life. In the 13th century, monastery moved in harmony with the liturgical cycles that modern society has largely forgotten. Monks didn't fight against the church calendar's rhythms. They adapted their lives to them, finding in each season its own spiritual gifts and contemplative lessons. Advent brought gentle preparation for Christmas. Brothers emerged from the penitential seasons gradually, like flowers opening to spiritual sun. There was copying of special manuscripts to be done for the feast, but also a wonder to be experienced, the miracle of divine incarnation approaching, the return of light to a dark world, the warming of hearts that had been quiet and still. Lent was a season of contemplation and communal spiritual work. The extended periods of prayer allowed for deeper meditation, but also for extended reading of sacred texts. Monks worked diligently during the daylight hours on their manuscripts and garden preparations, then gathered in the cool evenings to share Lectio Divina, the sacred reading that nourished their souls. Novices learned the ancient rhythms alongside their elder brothers, understanding the landscape of the spiritual year with their whole beings. Easter brought resurrection joy, not just of Christ, but of the year's spiritual experiences and lessons. Communities came together to celebrate what God had accomplished through their prayers, to rejoice in the manuscripts they had completed, to give thanks for the spiritual harvest of contemplation and devotion that sustained them. Ordinary time was not seen as empty space between feasts, but as the teacher offering its own gifts of routine contemplation. The settled rhythm of daily offices and regular work created natural patterns of prayer and reflection. Monks gathered around the rhythms of ora et labora, pray and work, sharing the ancient wisdom that connected them to centuries of monastic tradition. Entertainment in the 13th century monastery was not something monks consumed, but something they created together through their shared life of prayer and contemplation. Music wasn't performed by distant professionals, but by the brothers themselves, who had learned Gregorian chant passed down through generations of monastic communities. Monks gathered throughout each day to sing the divine office together, psalms that told the stories of their faith, their spiritual heritage, their hopes for eternal union with God. Voices blended in harmonies that had been perfected over decades of shared prayer. Novices learned the chants by listening, gradually adding their voices to the ancient melodies that echoed through stone corridors. The monastery library was not just a collection of books, but a place of spiritual conversation. At appropriate times, when the rule of silence was relaxed, elder monks would share wisdom about the sacred text they were copying. Young brothers would listen with hushed attention as stories unfolded that connected them to the great saints and scholars of their tradition. Games and physical recreation were simple affairs that brought the brothers together in appropriate fellowship. Monks found joy in testing their skills at appropriate activities during recreation periods. Perhaps simple contests of scripture memory walking meditation in the cloister garden, or the gentle competition of who could copy most beautiful illuminated letter. These weren't pursuits of glory or prizes, but expressions of the pleasure that comes from friendship lived within sacred boundaries. Asterisk, the scriptorium itself became a place of quiet creativity, where monks found deep satisfaction in the slow, meditative work of manuscript illumination. Brothers would spend hours carefully painting miniature scenes from Scripture, creating beautiful initial letters, and preparing sacred texts that would serve the monastery's liturgical needs for generations to come. Asterisk, in the 13th century monastery, time moved differently than it does today. There were no mechanical clocks ticking urgently in the background, no digital displays counting down seconds and minutes. Time was measured by the sun's passage across the sky, by the canonical hours marked by chapel bells, by the natural rhythms of prayer and contemplation themselves. Asterisk, monks aged gracefully within their community, gaining spiritual wisdom and practical knowledge as their hair grew gray beneath their brown hoods and their hands grew gnarled from years of copying manuscripts and tending gardens. Elderly brothers weren't set aside or forgotten. They were treasured repositories of monastic tradition and contemplative experience. Novices grew up with elder monks as part of their daily spiritual formation. Asterisk, death, when it came to the monastery, was not hidden away in distant places. It was part of life's natural cycle, acknowledged and grieved but understood as the final step in a brother's spiritual journey toward God. Communities gathered to support dying monks through their final hours, sharing prayers and sacred readings, celebrating lives of faithful service, finding comfort in their shared hope of resurrection. Asterisk, new vocations were equally communal events. When young men entered the monastery as novices, the entire community welcomed them, understanding that these new brothers would be shaped by everyone's prayer and example. Novices belonged not just to the novice master, but to the community, the tradition, the ongoing story of monastic dedication to God. Asterisk, the pace of change was slow enough that monks could adapt gradually, finding stability in traditions that connected them to centuries of monastic ancestors, while slowly evolving to meet new spiritual challenges. Innovation happened, but it was gentle, organic, integrated into existing patterns of prayer and contemplation rather than disrupting them. Asterisk, the beauty of life in the 13th century monastery lay not in grand spiritual experiences or dramatic religious events, but in the small ceremonies that gave meaning to ordinary moments. Monks understood instinctively that spiritual life's significance was found in daily rituals rather than extraordinary occasions. Asterisk, morning began with simple ablutions in the lavatorium, washing face and hands in cool water from the monastery well that had served the community for generations. This wasn't just cleanliness. It was a moment of spiritual awakening, of gratitude for the gift of another day to serve God, of preparation for whatever prayer and work the hours might bring. Asterisk, meals were ceremonies of gratitude and spiritual communion. Even the simplest food was received with appreciation for the earth that had produced it, the hands that had prepared it, the community that shared it in sacred silence. Monks ate slowly, tasting each bite mindfully, understanding that nourishment was both physical and spiritual sustenance for their life of prayer. Asterisk, the evening meal brought the brothers together to share not just food, but the spiritual atmosphere of their day. While they maintained appropriate silence during eating, a profound communication moved through the refectory, the communion of souls who had spent their day in shared dedication to God and service to their monastic community. Sleep itself was treated as a sacred transition from the day's active prayer to the night's contemplative rest. Monks prepared for sleep with the same care they brought to other daily activities. They might offer a brief prayer of gratitude for the day's spiritual blessings, settle into their simple beds made comfortable with rough wool blankets, and allow themselves to drift naturally into the restorative darkness that would prepare them for tomorrow's round of prayer and service. In the 13th century monastery, almost everything the monks used in daily life was created by their own hands within their own community. This wasn't primitive technology. It was sophisticated craft knowledge, passed down through generations of monastic communities, refined through centuries of patient practice, dedicated to creating beauty for God's glory. A monk working in the scriptorium would sit at his writing desk, feeling the parchment respond to gentle pressure from his carefully prepared quill, coaxing beautiful letters and sacred words from simple ink and skin. Each manuscript was unique, bearing the subtle signature of its creator's spiritual devotion, created slowly with attention to both function and beauty as an offering to God. Monks working in the garden used tools that were often made by their fellow brothers, implements passed from gardener to gardener, along with the knowledge of seasons and soil. The rhythmic motion of hoeing and planting connected them to the earth in a way that was both practical work and contemplative prayer. Each row of vegetables, both sustenance for the community and meditation on God's providence. Brothers skilled in carpentry shaped wood with tools blessed for sacred work, creating furniture and architectural elements that would serve the monastery for generations. The work required not just skill, but wisdom, understanding how different woods responded to cutting and shaping, how joints could be fitted to last, how beauty could be created from simple materials through patient, prayerful attention. Even the simplest craft required spiritual as well as technical knowledge. Making candles for the chapel, brewing ale for the community table, preparing parchment for manuscript copying. These weren't just chores, but spiritual arts that required understanding materials, timing, and technique, blessed through generations of monastic practice. Monks took pride in creating what their community needed for prayer and daily life. Education in the 13th century monastery wasn't confined to formal instruction or written texts. Novices learned by watching, by participating in community life, by gradually taking on responsibility within their spiritual family. Knowledge was passed down through example, through patient guidance, through the understanding that learning was a lifelong process of growing closer to God. A young novice might begin helping in the scriptorium as soon as he could hold a pen, steadily, not as labor but as spiritual formation and practical learning. He would watch the careful movements of experienced scribes, gradually understanding the principles behind techniques that had been refined over generations of monastic dedication to preserving sacred texts. Older novices took responsibility for teaching younger ones, creating bonds of spiritual care and patience that lasted throughout their monastic lives. Knowledge wasn't hoarded, but shared freely. understanding that the community's wisdom belonged to everyone and would only grow stronger through generous transmission from brother to brother. Formal learning often took place during the time set. Aside for Lectio Divina, where novices and professed monks alike engaged with sacred texts, not just for information, but for spiritual transformation. These sessions were gentle, integrated into the daily rhythm of prayer rather than separated from it in academic isolation. Monks continued learning throughout their lives, not through formal classes, but through experience, observation, and the sharing of wisdom with their brothers. Understanding was seen as something that accumulated gradually, like the patina on well-used prayer books, through decades of faithful attention to God and community. The calendar in the 13th century monastery was marked not by secular holidays, but by celebrations that connected the community to the sacred year and to their shared spiritual traditions. These festivals weren't breaks from monastic life, but intensifications of life's meaning and joy found in God. Christmas brought celebrations of the Incarnation and divine love. Communities would gather to observe the feast with special liturgies, perhaps extra candles in the chapel, carefully prepared readings from manuscripts they had copied during Advent. Novices would participate in the ancient ceremonies, learning the deep rhythms that connected them to centuries of Christian celebration. Easter brought the year's greatest celebrations of resurrection and renewal. Communities would observe the Triduum with extended prayer, then celebrate Easter morning with special liturgies that expressed gratitude for Christ's victory over death and for the spiritual renewal that the Lenten season had brought to their own hearts and community life. The feasts of saints provided opportunities for the monks to celebrate their particular spiritual heritage and the holy men and women who had walked the monastic path before them. These weren't elaborate entertainments, but intimate celebrations that reinforced bonds of tradition and spiritual inspiration that connected them to the communion of saints. Each celebration carried forward traditions that had been shaped by generations of monastic wisdom. Monks participated not as passive recipients of entertainment, but as active carriers of culture, adding their own prayers and devotion to ceremonies, their own voices to ancient chants, their own spiritual growth to the ongoing story of their monastic community's relationship with God. As our gentle journey through 13th century monastery life draws to a close, let's rest for a moment in the understanding of how the monks of this time found peace in their daily existence. They understood something that our busy modern world sometimes forgets, that contentment comes not from acquiring more, but from fully experiencing the presence of God in what we already have. Monks in the 13th century lived with a deep awareness of life's preciousness and their dependence on divine grace. This awareness didn't make them anxious or fearful, but rather helped them appreciate the simple gifts of each day, the warmth of sunlight streaming through chapel windows, the taste of bread they had helped bake in the monastery kitchen, the sound of they found meaning not in individual achievement, but in their connections to God, community, and the great tradition of monastic life that stretched back through generations and forward into an unknown but hopeful eternity. Their lives were woven into a larger tapestry of spiritual experience that gave significance to even the smallest daily tasks. As evening falls on our imaginary visit to this holy place, we can carry with us the wisdom of monks who understood that the art of living well lies not in doing more, but in being more fully present to God in the life we already have, whether that life is lived within monastery walls or in the ordinary circumstances of whatever calling we have received. And so, dear listener, our quiet journey through the peaceful corridors of medieval monastery life comes to its gentle end. As you rest here in the soft darkness of your own evening, perhaps you can carry with you some of the tranquility we found in that sacred place. The wisdom of living according to natural rhythms, of finding meaning in simple devotion, of understanding that we are all part of a larger spiritual story that connects us to everyone who has sought God before us and everyone who will continue. That search after we are gone, asterisk, let the images of that holy community settle into your mind like incense rising from chapel altars. Let the pace of those ancient hours slow your breathing, calm your thoughts, ease the tensions that the day has brought to your body and spirit. Let the bells that mark the monastic hours ring softly in your memory, calling you to the same peace that those medieval brothers found in their life of prayer and contemplation. Asterisk, there's nothing more you need to accomplish tonight. No problems you need to solve, no decisions you need to make. Just rest, knowing that you are part of the same human family that has been seeking meaning, peace, and connection with the divine for centuries. Sleep well, surrounded by the gentle wisdom of all those monks who understood that the greatest treasures are often the simplest ones. A moment of genuine prayer, a community of caring souls, the peaceful rhythm of breath moving in and out of your body in gratitude for the gift of life itself. Asterisk, good night, dear traveler. May your dreams be filled with the gentle peace of those sacred halls, and may you wake tomorrow with something of the serenity that those medieval monks found in their life of simple devotion to God and service to their community.